I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. Terry has come forward and said that he would like to be one of our guest speakers today. And in so doing, he has invited, I think, all of his family, wherever they are, to come and join us. So if those of our members who are looking around are wondering who these people all are, you'll find that they're Terry's family.
Some of them.
Most of them, at least. So there's a couple of things I wanted to share with you before we began. I'm sure most of you that are members at least are aware that this will be our 30th anniversary. And we have some celebrations in store. At the beginning of this year has started extremely well for us in that the International Association of Genealogy Societies in America during the last week awarded Kosher Koala outstanding publication. And that's an absolute credit to Danny, who is its current editor, to Robin Dryan, who was its previous editor, to Miriam Schiffen, and I'm going to need some help here.
Ricky
and
Ricky
Richard
and Sophie.
right?
And
So-
Sophie.
Sophie Kaplan. So there have also been, during this year, we've been looking at all sorts of things, like all the last minutes that we've had and all the things that have occurred in this association during the last 30 years. So one of my first questions to you is, so it's 30 years since we began. Do you recall when you joined the society? And why did you join it? And what are your best memories as a member? So if anybody would like to perhaps kick off that conversation, then let's have a look whether that's something that would be interesting for everybody. Anybody like to start with that?
Want me to say something about it, please?
Yeah.
Having been one of the founding members 30 years ago, why I joined it, and I mentioned this to Barbara recently, the fact that at that time, people didn't have the benefit of learning about their overseas European and other origins, etc. We only had the Jewish Historical Society, Australian Jewish Historical Society in Sydney, which concentrated on Australia. There wasn't the facility to learn about Poland or other places like that, where many of our origins began. Anyway, that's why I joined it, because there wasn't the facility, and with Sophie Kaplan, we started the society in about 1992. I must add a little bit more. I have been connected with the Jewish Historical Society like Sophie Kaplan was. So we knew what's available in Australia before we started this society. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else like to add to that? David Laffer, please.
I too was an original member of the society. I was not a member of the Historical Society. I remember being recruited by Sophie Kaplan to come to the first meeting of the group. I think there were 8 or 10 of us original members, including Ricky and Peter Nash, Sophie Kaplan. Terry was there and I was there, and we had meetings at Sophie Kaplan's place. The meetings went to about 2 o'clock in the morning. But no, as Terry said, there was no resources available in Australia, and Sophie seemed to be the one person who had some access and some contacts overseas, which we all used. And she guided us into starting our own research.
Thank you, David. There are many stories in circulation about the society and how it was formed and all the other organisations that were around. I think it says for itself something very special when many of the original people are still active in the society today. And even though some of them didn't join right 30 years ago, some of them only 28 or 29, but people like Jeanette and Gary Luke, and there are many others that are on this call that have all been very active in the society throughout these years. And we have to thank them for all the contribution that they've made and their willingness to help new people who have wanted to join the society throughout the time. I'm always interested to hear from new members and members who have been around for a long time as to what suggestions they have as to how in this crazy world of COVID and lockdown, what we can do differently, what we can do better, who our guest speakers could be, how we can have discussions. I see that starting something off by saying, you know, come and tell a story. A couple of days ago, I'd had one phone call and I was really a little concerned how this was all going to work out. But lo and behold, in the last couple of days, I have had lots of phone calls, lots of stories, and I'm going to look forward to sharing those with you shortly. Sarah, I saw you had your hand up. Just very briefly, what would you like to add?
Sorry, was that to me?
Right.
I joined the society probably about 95, about 3 years into it. I can't remember exactly, but just like to point out some bits that Terry didn't mention. What he had done many, many years ago, around 1970, taking photographs of our cemeteries, and some of the cemeteries don't exist now, going through all the Sydney Morning Heralds, noting down all the announcements from 1832 on that included anyone that looked Jewish, many other things like that. Terry laid the foundation for a whole lot of our lists that we refer to now.
Right.
Just wanted to mention that.
Thanks, Gary. Lovely. Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, yes, thank you. It was something Gary butting when I was trying to lower my hand. Yeah, I think I joined sometime in the late 90s. I know Sophie is one that encouraged me to join. I was trying to dig up Jewish ancestors on my mother's side because she always said that both her parents were of Jewish descent, and and I'm a Geras, but my grandmother, my mother's mother, had always said she had Jewish ancestors also, and both her parents had told me that when I was about 13. Also, I wanted to trace my husband's family from Germany. So, and it's been easier to trace my husband's family. I still got lots of red herrings in my mum's family. We've dug up some Jewish ancestors. We've also dug up, we thought, oh yes, we're connected with Moses, and we discovered, no, that guy was a stepfather. So you get all these things, and the kids didn't know. It was only when we started doing more digging up, we discovered that the actual father had died when the kiddies were very young, and their stepfather used to take them to shul. So there we are.
Sarah, there are so many stories to be told, and all of us have always had interesting stories from each of our families. So this afternoon, we're going to go to some of the people who have actually offered to tell their stories. And if Sunny would like to join us and start off by telling her story. So we have Sunny, who's going to talk about her mum. We've got Diane Johnson, who's going to tell us a story about some letters. We've got Peter Allen, who's also going to tell us an interesting discovery that he had in his family. And then last but definitely not least is Terry Newman and the sagas of the Yiddish ghost. So we will hold that and start with Sunny. So Sunny, if you're ready to come on and tell your story, we'd be delighted to hear it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Well
Okay.
done.
Okay. Well, my story starts when I joined the AJGS in 1995 and became a member of the committee in 2004. And during the next 10 years, I was the minute secretary and then took over the role of president. My interest in genealogy was awakened by the dedication and persistence of my late father, El Orchard, an early member of the society, in the research of our family tree. Among the various important documents he left me was a collection of photos, which I'll just show everyone now.
Yeah.
These two here are
Yeah.
my great-grandparents, right? And this tree goes back 7 generations. That's my great-grandparents. That's my grandparents. That's my mother's mother and mother's father. And then we're down the bottom. Now, the other thing is I want to show you is a wider professionally produced family tree. I want to say that there's been a huge benefit to me as a result of my membership in finding both my father's and my mother's family histories. I've got both. One fortuitous incident occurred at the conference in Canberra in 2008, at which I was approached by Robert Ryan. He showed me a page of names, all with the name Yorkshire, and asked if I knew them. Of course I did. They were those of my father's uncles and aunts. And as a coincidence, Robin was helping with a cousin's research into family tree, and therefore her research via the National Archives produced a wonderful history of the Yorkshire family. Covering the years from 1864 to 1951, it came with a map showing the birthplace of my great-grandfather in Siberia. The inclusion of immigration records proved more information about his children. This new research addressed the many questions that have puzzled me for years. A marvellous publication that I regard as so valuable. Now, the other thing I have to talk about is my mother. I discovered at a workshop in 1999, I picked up from the resource library 2 books entitled The Scattered Seeds. The author was George Sackheim, who lived in Illinois, USA. They contain his family tree and history dating from 1659 at the time of the first blood libel to around the 1980s. And what a family tree it was. 9 rabbis in direct ancestry and 43 in this branch of Sackheim's tree. Important names were Rabinovich, Castleman, and Zach. What a discovery of such a rich ancestry. Leafing through these publications, I came across the name Lazar Kaganovich. He is recorded in Russian history as having been one of Stalin's henchmen. It was under this dictatorship that Kaganovich was known to have been cruel to his fellow Jews. He also was heavily involved in the persecution of the Russian peasants at the time of famine. I already knew that my birth name of my maternal grandmother was also Kaganovich, but I could not find her connection to Lazar. The late Ricky Nash helped me to contact George, asking about this relationship. This was his reply. Dear cousin, your grandmother was Sarah and her father's name was Mordechai Cohen. He was a brother to Lazar Kaganovich's father, Meshulam Zalman Cohen. For some reason, Meshulam changed the name to Kaganovich. Thus, this information proved that my grandmother was a first cousin to Lazar. Little did I know about this relationship to the infamous villain, Lazar Kaganovich. The lesson here is to look more closely at other people's families' trees. You never know, you might be sitting on a branch.
It's true. So true. All right. Do we have any questions for Sunny?
Were they Kohanim, Sonny?
Hmm?
Were the Kaganovs Kohanim?
With the Kaganovich Cohen.
Yes, that's a Russian spelling of the Cohen. You know, that's the Russian spelling of Cohen. Vicky.
Oh, I just want to add that's really interesting, Sunny, because that I know of Kaganovich, called Kaganovich, and I think that there's another relative. I don't know whether it was his sister or a relative of his that was actually one of Stalin's mistresses. Do you know?
No, that's not true. That's not true.
It's not true?
No.
What do you mean it's not true?
I don't know. I've got all these stories, and I didn't see a
so
story.
You don't
about
think they're related? No, but I mean, there was a Kaganovich, a woman who was Jewish, and I was just wondering whether they were related.
I don't think so. From what I read of the history, I haven't found anything like that.
Okay, because.
Thanks, Vicky. Anybody else got some questions for Sunny? Sunny, thank you for that. That was lovely. A lovely way to start the stories for the afternoon. So I'm
Thank
now
you.
going to invite Diane Johnson to tell a short story about her life and a letter, a very interesting letter.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My story is about two letters that I discovered very late in my search. My search started back in 2000 when I discovered I had a birth family. And I was 55 then, so I'm 77 now, and it's been a wonderful journey. But I had a lot of difficulty in trying to backtrack from England, where my mother's family came out to in the 1870s. I had a great deal of trouble trying to step back to see whereabouts in Poland or where other places they might have come from, because the census didn't give me any indication. They just said Kingdom of Poland, Empire of Russia, and that's all I could gather. But around 2011, I'd been over to England. My family from Russia had come over to Hull in Yorkshire, and they settled there and actually lived their lives there. That's the three generations: my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, and my great-great-great-grandfather. And I was very fortunate. Jeanette Soulos put me right on the right track and got me in touch with archivists in Hull. And one of them was David Lewis, and he traced all my family in Hull, and he found the gravestones. So over I went, and we had a look at the gravestones, and they were in three Jewish cemeteries. And we had a look at the translations of the Hebrew on the gravestones, and we came across the name Dukoski, and they had normally called themselves Barnett, and it didn't sound very European to me, nor to David. But when we had a look at one of the translations on the gravestones, we found that his name, my third great-grandfather, was Dov Eliezer Dukoski. And we thought, good, well, there's another name we might be able to track down and see where exactly the Dukoskis came from. No luck, a very big brick wall. So along we went, and I thought, I'll just sit back and take a breath here and something might happen. Anyway, it did. David Lewis always went down to the London Metropolitan Archives, and still does. And he goes through all the correspondence of letters that have come down from different synagogues all over England, and they've come down and deposited here in a central place at the London Metropolitan Archives. And he was going through one of the envelopes, the grey envelopes with the ribbon, and he came across two letters written in Hebrew and Yiddish by my great-great-great-grandfather. And it was such a breakthrough. And I'll just show you one of the pages of the translation. The letter might be a foot, 12 inches across by 12 inches down, square. When I eventually went over to England and saw these letters and held them in my hands, they were very small. The writing was beautifully done, and one of the translators said that the writer had a very artistic hand. And my third great-grandfather was in fact a Hebrew teacher, and in England and back where he'd come from. But this is the crux of the whole story. In that letter, one of the letters written in 1878, he says that they came from Calvaria. He actually names the town that they've come from. So it was such a thrill. And David said, well, now you know the town that they've come from. So I was very excited, and let me see. Here we are. I'm back again. We're very excited. I was very excited about that. So I thought, right, it's time to go over to Calvary and have a look. So I joined a group in 2013, all due to this wonderful letter that had been found and written by my third great grandfather. And I went over to Lithuania because by now Calvary was not in Poland. It was in the southwestern region of Lithuania. And I walked up the streets and I visited the summer synagogue and the winter synagogue and just realised that this is where the family had attended. And it was a really wonderful moment. And I came back and I just feel those letters really opened up. They broke down a very big brick wall. I came back and shared this knowledge with family in America, cousins in England, and of course my own very close cousins and sister in Sydney. And they were thrilled because they hadn't known anything apart from the fact that they were told that we were all Russian. So to know these people, this letter, which has really brought our great-great-great-grandfather back to us. He's alive again to us. He's come back to the family. And these letters really meant for me a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful gift, because I nearly missed out on a family I didn't know I had until I was 55. And it's been just a wonderful experience. And last week we found another cousin in Sydney who was related to my great-great-grandmother. And she's in Sydney and she has a family. So the story goes on. But those letters were the real wonderful gift. And I really thank my great-great-great-grandfather for writing them, and 140 years ago. So that's my story. Thank you.
Very good. Diane, that's a wonderful story. Is there anybody who has some questions of Diane about that story? Jeanette?
I can't think, sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeanette.
One question. When you were handling the letters, did you have to wear special gloves or anything like that? What was it like in the archives?
No, I didn't. And I said to David, aren't we supposed to be given gloves to wear? And he said, no, not these gloves. And when I held the letters, it was very thick, textured paper. It was very hard paper. It wasn't like the writing paper we have today. Very, very thick and hard. And it was amazing to think he could write so beautifully on such a rough textured paper. But no, we didn't have to wear gloves.
So can you describe the archives a bit?
Yes, we walked in, we had to, David really had set up an appointment with one of the archivists there who had the envelope ready to give to us that contained a folder which contained a lot of letters inside it, tied up with a blue ribbon. When we went to the counter, we had to, David did the talking. It's about 3 stories high, the building. And when you go in, you've got an area for a locker. So we had to put our bags in. We couldn't take anything in with us. But I was allowed to take the camera. So that's how David Lewis was able to take a photo of me holding the letters. I'm just so sorry. I'm just so sorry you can't see them, because I've got them all there, but it's not coming up. However,
we'll add them to it afterwards.
Yes, yes, please, because they're all lined up. But no, we then were allowed to go in, but fortunately they allowed us to bring the camera in. So they said, yes, you'd be very welcome to take a photo of the actual letters. So I took a photo, which I've got down there at the bottom. It's in Yiddish and Hebrew, beautiful writing. And so we were allowed to take photos, but couldn't take anything apart from that in with us. no pens and pencils. We were provided with pencils if we wanted to write anything down on the paper provided. And we were given, I think we had a time frame, we had a time limit that we could go through the letters. And then it was not crowded, it was quite empty, quite roomy. It was like a very big library, very quiet. And the archivists behind the counter and the assistants couldn't have been more helpful, and they were really pleased and excited for us when I told them about the letters. I said, these is the first time I've seen these letters. And David and I realised that this folder, probably these letters hadn't been read for probably over 100 years. And it was only, for, you know, people within the family and David who'd actually read them. So I didn't take the originals home with me. I wanted them to be left so that family up in Leeds and Hull could all come down to London Metropolitan and get those letters, because David's still up there in Hull working away with all the Jewish families and their histories in Hull over the past 250 years. So that was the building, and it's still there. And but I think you've got to make an appointment. David went through the chief rabbi, and the chief rabbi said, yes, we'll let that envelope, that folder be released. And so it was ready for us when we went in.
Thank you for all that. Now, just on the question of the archives, you mentioned the London Metropolitan Archives.
Yes.
Now, I've dealt with the National Archives of England and Wales, I think it is. So can you tell me more about the London Metropolitan Archives?
Not much more than what I've just sort of described, but it's quite different. It's quite apart from the National Archives and the other one you've mentioned. These are the London Metropolitan, and they hold a lot of letters, I would imagine, a lot of Jewish correspondence down there. So this might be another lead, that you may find some letters, some written correspondence, or something along those lines. I'd get in touch with the London Metropolitan Archives, or David Lewis. He would be able to tell you. He's in Hull. But London Metropolitan Archives is the building.
I have some information.
Fabulous, Diane. Thank you so much.
That's
Any
it.
other questions for Diane?
Can I just add a little bit on what
Certainly.
David Alford asked? That particular institution that Diane was talking about, Diane, forget it.
Diane, doesn't matter.
Yeah, they have a lot of Jewish records, as you said, a lot of synagogues that no longer exist. They've kept them. They put them in a place, and people like who need information about it can refer to them. But there are catalogues of those records, Jewish records, essentially, that relate to no longer existing synagogues. They're in that place, and not only and other organisations that no longer exist.
Yes,
Fabulous.
the synagogue in Hull has now not exactly closed down, but all their paperwork has gone into London. All their synagogue history has gone in. But when it comes to family research, the history of the families of Hull have all gone to the historical family history centre in the new library in Hull.
Good.
So Hull's library holds the family history papers, but the synagogue and all the correspondence to do with the correspondence and the synagogue committees, everything, rabbis have all gone in, yes, into the London Metropolitan. Yeah. Thanks, Terry, because I didn't make that clear enough. Thank you.
Terry, wasn't that where Eric was from?
Eric, I did.
Eric.
Yes, yes. Just in passing, that was a place that a lot of people from Europe stopped off at for a time. Hull, there was a port right up north.
Yeah.
And I just add something about Hull, Eliza. The Hull station, they created another platform because cholera was raging in the 1870s. And when the refugees, when amongst my family, came over from Lubin, they all made their way up to get onto the ships from Lubin, brought them across to Hull. Those that wanted to go on to Liverpool, to go on to South Africa and England and America rather, they all had to go onto a special platform so that the cholera, if they were carrying it, would not have any effect on the local community of Hull. So they, and the separate platform's still there, and I've got a photo of it. And David Lewis has been invaluable in, just wonderful the way he was able to give me the history of that particular platform. But Hull was the central, it was the second largest port in England at the time. The second
Wow.
largest.
Really interesting.
Yeah. So they went onto that platform and waited, and were well apart from the ordinary platforms that the normal trains came through from Leeds and London. And so, yeah.
I think Robin wanted to say something a minute ago.
I was just going to add to what Terry added, which is that LMA, London Metropolitan Archives, have got lots of the disappeared synagogues records.
Right. Okay, Diane, thank you so much for that. That was extremely interesting. Peter Allen said he had a very short story to share with us. So, Peter, if you'd like to come on and tell us about your letter discovery.
Okay, I'm back in.
There we go.
Starting my video. Hi, everybody. Hi, cousins. It's lovely to have first, second, and third cousin Sandra McKenna in this Zoom. So how cool is
Is
that?
she here now?
Yes, Sandra's there, aren't you, Sandra? I'm sharing
My other cousin, Petty.
sharing my screen. Can you guys see that? Can you see
Yes.
that?
Yeah.
Well
Right.
done.
So unlike, well, not unlike Terry, but Terry's going to talk about my Levy, our Levy side of the family, whereas I'm talking about, I'm talking about my father's side, my late father, Philip Allen. His grandfather was, well, surname of Aaron, and we thought it was Aaronoff and so on, whatever. But as you can see, the name was either Maurice Aaron, spelled the English Morris, or Maurice, the French way. But my late uncle Maurice Allen, who some of you may recall, my late father's elder brother, was a past president of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, inherited the name, and indeed so did I in my middle name, although I think that's come from my granduncle on my mother's side. But anyway, the ancestors, it says, of Benjamin Allen, my youngest son. You can see myself, Peter, there, my late mum, Moya, and that's all the Levies. And we know a lot about the Levies, and Terry's going to tell you a lot about that as we believe. But on my father's side, both his parents came from Russia, or at least my grandmother came from Ukraine. And we know a fair bit about her family. But my grandfather's family, we knew very little about. His mother came to Australia. He was born, he used to tell the story, he was actually that he was born in England, in Liverpool. And then he said he was born in St. Petersburg. And finally, we worked it out, he was born in Vilna, as you can see there, in 1888. His parents aren't shown on this family tree. But I was aware from the Great Synagogue's records, the marriage certificate of the Great Synagogue. You can see down there, Sarah Hetty's my grandmother, Jacob Joseph Aaron. So he actually came to Australia shortly before 1919. He was actually married, coincidentally, Christmas Day 1919, so it was 102 years ago, nearly. But his surname was actually Aaron at the time that he was married, known as Allen. And that's the marriage certificate, but the marriage certificate from the Great Synagogue, which Joe Kensel kindly sourced from us. And you can see here, he's put there, Jacob Joseph Aaron, known as Allen, and the spelling is A-R-R-O-N, born in Leeds. Well, he was actually born in Vilna, but he didn't want to tell people that. And my grandmother, his parents, it's got his mother's name, Esther, surname not known, but father's name, Morris Aaron. And it says death was Bloemfontein, South Africa. And all we knew, my late father tried to find out his grave. But when you look on the Jewish Roots Bank of the South African database, it's actually got the cemetery in Bloemfontein. Just to go back 2 seconds, I meant to point out in this family tree, of my 8 great-grandparents, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Jacob's mother, Esther, are all buried in Australia, most of them at Rookwood, a few down in Bendigo, but the only one, the 8th of them, Jacob Aaron, is the only one not buried in Australia of my great-grandparents. So I went on the search for, well, we were going to South Africa for a holiday. Can I find where his grave? And it turns out it was in Bloemfontein, which surprised us. I contacted people in South Africa and they were very helpful. And this was discovered was his naturalisation papers. And lo and behold, I was surprised. He'd actually arrived 2 years before this naturalisation in 1903. He'd arrived 2 years, 3 months earlier, 1901. And you do the maths, and that means my grandfather himself was only 13 when he came out with some of his siblings. The other siblings were actually born in South Africa. So he lived for a while in Cape Town, in Commonwealth Street, Cape Town, and then in Constitution Street. But at some stage they moved to Bloemfontein. So I got in touch with the, there is a Jewish community still in Bloemfontein, but very small. But on the way there, of course, we had to go to the game parks, beautiful sunsets, and that was a fantastic trip. But I digress. Saw what's his name, Gloria?
Mandela.
Jacob Mandela statue. Wonderful guide. This is actually in Bloemfontein. I'm not sure why his statue's in Bloemfontein. I've forgotten now, but anyway. So this lovely lady here, Leah Sherbos, I think her name was, had checked that the grave was still in the cemetery in Bloemfontein. This was our guide there, who was very helpful as well. And she actually made sure, and he made sure that it was safe, because the cemetery in Bloemfontein, as in lots of parts of South Africa, can be quite dangerous. They have people, they're not, the blacks there, it's not so much that they're looking for trouble, but they have these like pagan ceremonies and whatever. They talk about zombies and all the rest of it. It's pretty gross. Anyway, so we found my great-grandfather's name, and lo and behold, the name was Morris Aaron, not spelt slightly differently. Unfortunately, the original headstone has been damaged and lost. So they've replaced, as you can see, all these very similar headstones were replaced, but at least there's a new headstone, as you can see there. He died in 1909. My grandfather would have been 21 at that stage, so he became the head of the family. But amazing to find the headstone of the one great-grandparent that's not living in Australia. And so there we are in the cemetery with our new South African friend. The Bloemfontein Jewish community is very small now, only left the old people there. But you can see I placed a copy of the book Jewish Antics, which I was part of the production of, just to give him assurance. And that's the little ohel in the cemetery there. Unfortunately, it's closed. It's been graffiti and all the rest of it. But then we next door to there, near the cemetery, is actually the South African War Museum, and I met the chap there and we swapped books. But this, I just thought I'd show you this memorial to the women, the Boer women, who were very, very poorly treated. In fact, the first concentration camps in the world were really set up by the British in South Africa, where they impounded a lot of the wives of the farmers, the Boers, during the war, and many women and children died in those concentration camps. And that's actually where the name originated from, as I understand it. It's a terrible story. That's the one. Yeah, sorry, was Gloria's pointing out. That's the woman here who she was an English woman, actually came to South Africa, and she made sure that these Boer women were looked after and the children. Her ashes are buried at the bottom of this. We went to another game park. Just by the way, do not touch. Not only will this animal kill you, it will hurt the whole time you are dying. It's actually a colour. Oh, it's a small cat calabash. Anyway, another lion park and whatever. And just steal the thunder of Terry. If he hasn't, have you got this photo, Terry?
Just have a quick look at it now. More or less.
Okay, so anyway, the other side, the Levy side.
That's where in December they had a big fire. In
this is the main street of Grenfell. I know I'm switching
Right.
great grandparents, but this store here was his furniture store. You can just see the half the
Right. Yes. Yeah.
yes.
Seen it.
So this is the Levy side, as I said. I
Greatest
did a
wonder of
segue.
the world.
Yeah, I did a segue. But what was wonderful was to get the assistance from our cousins in South Africa to source the grave and get hold of this naturalisation certificate. As you can see, the South African Jewish Roots Bank, and some other people on this Zoom session might be able to talk more about that. But I like to say the story that my heritage, I'm one of the, because they came to, my grandfather came with his siblings after his grandfather died a couple of years, or actually 1917, 18, he came to Australia, met my grandmother and married her within 6 months. I'd like to say I'm one of the first South African Jewish refugees because he came in 1918, not 1988. Yeah, so that's it.
Well done. Lovely story. Do we have any questions for Peter?
Stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Can Annie make a statement? Not a question.
Yes.
Peter's got a lot of information available if anyone's got any connections to the military who's passed on particularly, and a lot of it's in the Jewish Historical Society for reference.
Thanks, Terry.
And other museums, like in Canberra, for example.
Well, Terry's going to do his bit.
Sure. Oh, okay.
Thanks. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, Terry. And
right. Any questions, anybody?
Yeah, just wanted to know what was the original name? Was it Aaron A double? Or double A?
I'd love to know, Janet. You could get on the path for me. He was born. Well, yeah. His papers say naturalization that he was born in Vilna, which is not Russia. Sorry, not Russia. That's Lithuania, right? But it does say Maris Aaron. But then when you look down here, it says his mark. So he's just put a cross there, which we found even for a few soldiers, as you would appreciate. So we don't know. You know, it's probably Moshe Aaron. And when I put it to my mother that was my grandfather a Cohen, she was horrified. She says, "Oh no, because she's a Levy, right?" So she didn't want to be outdone by my father. But my grandfather, as I understand it, never professed to be a Cohen. So who knows? But no, we don't. All we know is that that's the nearest we have to the name Aaron. Yeah.
Right.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Lovely story.
Thanks.
Thank you for the presentation as well. Well done.
My pleasure.
Okay, Terry, are you ready?
Yeah, it's got a lot of material, but that doesn't matter. My information has never really been examined in Australia. I'll give you a little bit of background, 2 sentences. One, it all concentrates on my mother's side of the family, as Peter said, were Levies. None of this material relates to my father's side, who, for example, were Solomons. This material is Levy material. One of the things I want to mention is about a guy called Joseph Levy. Joseph Levy was, they called him at one stage the Yiddish. Well, it's a convict. He was sent out as a convict, arrived in 1820, a little while ago. But the funny thing about it is if you look up documents in England where he was, where the family came from in London, you'll find there's no reference to what he said when he when he was taken into custody. There's no reference to what he said. There's only what effectively these people said happened. And what happened, really, and there's an article about it, he was taken into custody. He accidentally knocked someone side on, you might say, and came away with a watch and a few other things. In 1819, the article where you can read all about it is in the Australian Jewish Historical Society of 1979. Just not too long, it was published after the death of the writer, who was George Bergman, Dr. George Bergman. I don't know how many people knew him, but I knew him personally because we used to go out to cemeteries. That was the staying in the cemeteries. So he wrote about the Yiddish ghost. Why was a Yiddish ghost? Because the newspaper, Joseph Levy, the Jewish paper and also the non-Jewish papers, heard knocking at the place where he lived in Burma, knocking on the door at night time after Joseph Levy had passed away. A ghost there is. Would you believe it? It was in the Telegraph here. It was in the Jewish news, caught on about it and described a Jewish ghost. Well, and he was a convict that came out in 1820, eventually starting a brewery in Burma and other nice establishments for food, etc. So that's Joseph Levy, would you believe? And he ended up marrying a granddaughter of, actually, sorry, some other family members ended up coming out after they realised that Joseph Levy had served his sentence. And of course, they had various things to cope with, because in England, a family member, and that's my great-great-grandfather, something like that, Henry Levy, passed away in 1838, but his wife had a number of kids to look after, children. Now, Henry and his wife in England, Zipporah or Simi, married in 1808, a fair time ago, in the Great Synagogue, London. And if anyone, this is a hint to people who use the records and will use the records down the track, in the Genealogical Society at Linfield, they look up some records there to do with Jewish marriages or Jewish whatever, Jewish deaths, Jewish births. That particularly marriages, there's 2 volumes there by different people. And if you look up the catalogue, you'll find them. And I obviously had reference to them, the people who took part in marriage, the 2 sides, because I got the death certificates. So that's a reference of material that people should look up when they're wanting to know about family of England. My situation was, there were several siblings came out, including our great-grandfather, Michael Levy, died in 1889 at Grenfell, which is out in the country areas. And there was a brother who died in the same, he lived in the same street, and his shop was also burnt down like Michael's in 1888. What I want to refer to now, and there was a few other relatives came out, including Lewis Levy. Lewis married a great-granddaughter of, who was it? James Roos. James Roos it was. The first farmer in Australia and came out on the first fleet. So, and what happened, Lewis Levy, he came out first and he stayed near where his uncle was in Berrima, Joseph Levy, where he was, and started helping him in his occupations there.
Yeah.
And what happened down the track, he started to send money back to his family when he realised that they were really badly off once his father had died, because there was a whole lot of children, probably about 9 or 10 children, if not more. That was his mother. Well, anyway, well, after doing some research, I find I had to find out where his mother, Lewis and now Michael Levy, etc., where did they hail from? And you try and track down, it was mentioned earlier, family members in England, you got a repetition of names. All right, we had Levy's, Henry Levy. There was just 3 died in the one year. It's in London, 1838. 3 Henry Levys died. All right, you work out which one is ours. Nice to see you, Chris. But now I had to try and track him down. I found that after one of the daughters, and that's Sarah, married a guy called Abrahams, nice Jewish name. They left London and went to live in Liverpool. And that's where Simi, mother, lived with her daughter, a married daughter, and they had kids and all the rest of it. Well, I needed to find where and when Simi died. And I applied to the synagogue in Liverpool in England, and they gave me a certificate to say that she died in 1868, aged 80. And then further inquiries revealed there wasn't any tombstone in the cemetery. How terrible I felt. However, I have one. I have a copy of her actual tombstone. Died in 1868, aged 80. And it says on it, Simi Levy. That was the one who I'm going to mention now in a couple of minutes about a letter she sent to Sydney, Australia. Or actually, she sent it to Berrima, to her son. So that, I better mention how we came by that. A tombstone photograph taken a few years ago. The tombstone had actually been buried in the ground in a cemetery in Liverpool. She died in 1868. What happened, the cemetery got all overgrown over the years, and some of the tombstones got buried. And as a rule, they buried face down. They fell on their face, the tombstones, including hers. Now, that cemetery did very well. This is only several years ago, maybe 10. They got money from the British government from a fund. It's like a heritage fund, but they raised money out of £1 million they got for lotteries, the lottery fund they called it, £1 million, and they spent it on resuscitating the cemetery. Had a whole lot of rubbish, trees and everything else, and they found where there were spaces, they tried to see whether there were buried tombstones there, and that was one of them that had a buried tombstone. And a friend of mine from Liverpool in England took a photo of the tombstone, a resuscitated tombstone, because formerly it wasn't like that some years ago. We got that. Now, what I want to tell you, the main thing, there was a letter sent by the lady in 1840. If you work out how many years ago, that's a fair time ago. And the letter on the outside of the envelope says, to Lewis Levy or care of, basically, Joseph Levy's Berrima, 1840. It reached Sydney Post Office in November 1840. Okay, now what happened was we couldn't read the letter inside it. It had faded so far away. I had to borrow the assistance of family and friends to try and make it out. Why? How did I know there was a letter? Because a non-Jewish friend had family who'd kept it. It's addressed to the Levys, but it wasn't in the hands of the Levys. And currently it's up in Queensland, that letter, the actual letter. And I've spent about 2 years on and off trying to see whether the present owner of that letter can locate it. So essentially what we tried to do is one of our non-Jewish persons kept a copy of the letter, a photo of it. And the problem was we couldn't read the photos. Too dark, too hard to read. What I wanted to say was people in our family, when they came out from the 1840s, they went to Berrima. They came to Sydney and went to Berrima because there was family in Berrima. For example, Lewis Levy, a nephew of the convict, went there. There was John, a brother, and we have a descendant here as one of the members. And there was Michael Levy. Those people, up until the early 1850s, they went to Berrima, stayed a while there, and started looking for wives, because all of them, all the males, were not married. They came here. So here are a few things that we managed to work out from the letter. And this one is Kim Phillips started to try and transcribe. I saw yours, that there was a last prayer, my first prayer in the morning to you. Your brother is coming to you, basically. So is your sister. Essentially, the brother, and I'll read it from another copy. Yeah, what it basically says, she says that this is the mother in 1840 sending a letter to her son in Berrima, son being Lewis Levy. And us as Levy people remember the names, how they've been used in the various generations. This is what she said. One of the things she said, starting on line 7, I can't forget that I'm your mother and always feel the greatest pleasure in hearing from you. She's writing this to her son in Australia. At the time I received your letter, your brother George had left London on a ship, basically, for Sydney, a convict ship, and she mentions the name of the ship and the name of the captain. You say that I neglect writing, but I assure you that as soon as I received the money, I wrote to you directly. My dear child, I'm really much obliged to you for the money, but it caused me a great many worries among my family, for they seem to think that you embezzled some part of the money belonging to your grandmother. My dear child, I would write you many more particulars, but before you receive this, I hope you will have the pleasure to embrace your brother George. who will inform me more than I can put down in writing. You wish me to come to Sydney. She's saying that the mother in 1840 stated that. The funny part about it is the family were so poor, they was, in effect, a few of them were going around London, or going around England looking for work. The problem is they weren't all being registered in the same census records, because 1841, a couple of them were already left England, were here in 1840 in Berrima. The other thing, as I said, I was tracking down what happened to the family, and I managed to locate a few of them. Like there was a guy called Nathan Levy. You might have heard of him, except the ones you've heard of aren't ours directly for that generation. The one who became Nathan Levy, went to Melbourne and started a family there, or a second family, because his first wife died and he started a second family. That was Nathan Levy. We all have Nathan Levy's going down in the family, the same as we have Lewis and Henry. All the names repeat themselves. The other thing, we did have a Levy reunion, and quite a number of those people who are watching this Zoom program recall meeting, and that was in 2007, around 2007. And there's one guy who might be watching now, or might have wanted to watch, is Bernard Levy. Bernard's about 88, doesn't want me to tell you, but when he was 74, he was interviewed by the Jewish paper, and it said as a heading, celebrating the generations, Levy family reunites. And that was 200 people roughly were at that reunion in basically Lane, near the park near the water, not far away from Lane Cove on the, there. So we were there. And this is what he says. Michael Levy, this is our great-grandfather, who passed away in 1889, immigrated to Australia in 1850, or close on, and was an auctioneer, as he was, and was a key figure in civic affairs in Forbes. Forbes is one of the country towns. An observant Jew, I'm reading from the newspaper, an observant Jew, Levy conducted Shabbat services at his auction rooms and led the construction of a synagogue in Templar Street, that's in Forbes, which was consecrated in 1862. He helped to get a grant of land for a Jewish cemetery in Forbes. Well, the same applied in Grenfell, where he moved to after, because a number of Jews like Michael Levy were following the goldfields. They went from one goldfield to another. As they start to wear out, they moved on to the next. So that's about the Levies, and the important thing is, and I stated this earlier, around about the Yiddish ghost. The Yiddish ghost that the newspapers had, because of knocking on his, there was a Victoria Inn, that was one of them. There was a couple of other ones. The noise was knocking, and they believed it must be Lewis Levy wanted to come back, Joseph Levy wanting to come back. And he'd served his time as a convict, but the funny part about it is they don't record it. as a convict after a certain time. People don't talk about it. It's history. There were so many convicts there in those areas, anywhere from Penrith back to Nowra and Ben, etc. Down that way, but there was a guy, I mentioned George in passing. He was mentioned in that letter. A brother was on his way to Sydney, George. Now, he wasn't so old, but there wasn't any work for him in England. It was a depression, and we had a depression in Australia as well in the early 1840s. What happened to George? George did arrive on that convict ship in 1840, like his mother had said was coming. George went and joined his brother down in Berrima, and stayed for 2 or 3 years, and went after that to New Zealand. And people here, our Jewish community and Levies, would not have been aware that a brother had left and gone to New Zealand. They didn't know. That was only, we found out recently when we managed to transcribe that part of that letter, which we're still working on, more information about the family. So I have the feeling that might be enough to give you an indication of what the Levies have achieved here in Australia. And I'm really happy that my mother and Peter, my cousin, and Margaret, my other cousin, had that generation of parents of the Levies. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Terry.
Terry, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. So I think now we'll open the floor to all other members of the family.
I'm not getting your pictures. Do you know that?
Terry, it's Penny, and I'm a cousin. Solomon Kirsch was my grandfather, for other members of the family. And I just wanted to clarify, is Joseph Henry's brother or the brother of Michael?
Joseph wasn't the same generation. He was a generation above.
Right, so he was Henry's brother.
We're talking about Henry, who married
Zipporah. Yes.
Yes. No, it was the next generation up.
I think he was.
He does refer, she does refer, and I didn't describe it directly. She said to Joseph, not Joseph, to Lewis Levy, her son, in effect, don't forget to thank your uncle. And he is described in various places as being uncle to Lewis and, of course, Michael and John. So that was, you can't see it anyway. We'll make sure that we can get it transcribed.
We can add those pieces in for you as well, Terry, so that everybody gets to see those documents.
Just another
Can I just say something? We said he was described as being an uncle, that convict. However, we can't say for sure whether he's an uncle being a brother of Henry Levy or being on the mother's side, because it's possible she was a Levy too. The problem is we don't have it written anywhere what her, quote, maiden name was. Because when she married, and both of them married, it was written Henry Levy, but when she married to Henry Levy in 1808 in London, it was only written in Hebrew. And it mentioned the father's name, no surname. However, the format of it could be that he was a Levi we don't know for sure what his name was. And unfortunately, when people arrived in England, a lot of them didn't give their former names that they had in Europe.
A couple of other two quick ones, and I'm sure other family members want to ask. I thought there was a story at one point that one of the brothers ended up on the Dunbar, which went down in Sydney. So that was one. Perhaps should I give my other question? You probably know that I ended up, my mother, who was Solomon's daughter, went to New Zealand where I was born and grew up. So I'm curious about this George Levy. And if you happen to know which city he's in, maybe my sister in New Zealand can do some homework.
Okay, I can
So
get
perhaps
you the
you
information.
can tell me that later.
Can I tell you quickly about the Dunbar? Many times over the years, I'd meet former deceased, I was going to say deceased relatives, people who are now deceased, family members. They'd say, did you find out what happened? We are supposed to have had a relative who went down on a Dunbar. And I started researching and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I had to look up, of course, go to births, deaths and marriages. And by chance, I put in the name, Henry Levy. And somehow or other, they found a Levy spelt differently. And the sole surviving person on the Dunbar happened to say there was someone with that name, body not recovered. So I said to myself, that must be, they later family members learned there was supposed to have been a brother on board, but they at the time, and most of the time, they weren't living in Sydney to find out. They were living, say, in country areas like Forbes or whatever. In the middle to late 1850s, they weren't living in Sydney, our families. They were living out in the country. Now, what was the second question?
Which city in New Zealand?
Yes, I know. George Levy left about 1843 and went to New Zealand after spending about 3 years with his brother in Berrima. What happened was, a couple of years later, around the Wellington area, he ended up marrying in 1845. Well, some areas say 1850, but he had a daughter. Might have been 2 daughters there. I have to refine that research, but that's what happened to George. The only other, so I have some references. I think he died about 1902 or something.
May I say one other?
But could I just add one more thing? His wife wasn't Jewish. Had the same Carol Bell.
Just before it finishes.
Oh, I know it's almost 4:30. Carol Bell.
How do I get onto gallery? I just want to see everybody who's there. Gallery. Well, you know, to see everybody. Oh, okay. Oh, I thought you.
So I'll get information on George Levy a little later.
Sorry, I should mute it.
You won't get it from Australia. You have to get it from New Zealand. And a granddaughter and the member of his family married a Jewish person in the 1900s.
Thank you.
And it's funny.
Can I say one more quick thing? Particularly Peter might be interested. There's the South African connection too, isn't there? A sister who married and went to South Africa. I don't know if people know about that one.
We do. We've got the references. A couple of descendants in Sydney, as a matter of fact, out in the Bondi area. The family spread out, and we do have the references. One of them married a Raphael in Cape Town. And some of their descendants came to Australia when the going got pretty bad in South Africa.
Terry,
Peter
can I,
has a question.
yeah, Terry, can I clarify? You were talking about the Dunbar chap, and I'm looking at our family tree here. Sorry, I didn't understand the outcome.
Well, I believe he was on the boat.
Not
Henry
on the
Levy.
passenger list. When you look at the Dunbars,
But it's not on the passenger list.
no.
No. But sometimes not everyone is listed on passenger lists. That's
Okay.
what-
So there's evidence to suggest that he was on there. He did go down with the ship, but there's no proof.
Well, but there's no real write-up about it. There's no real write-up. And the families, Australian families, Jewish families, didn't know probably
Right.
that he was on until down the track.
Okay. Next question. You mentioned one of the Levies came out on a convict ship, but he wasn't a convict. Is that what?
No, because you didn't have. This is in 1840.
Right.
Obviously, they needed. They wanted some passengers. There weren't so many convicts coming out at that time like there were earlier on.
Yeah.
And you could buy a ticket, and this bloke came out, George Levy.
Right. Okay. We were just, by the way, we went up to Berrima, and we in the house starting in the inn that Joseph Levy, our convict great grand uncle convict, had. The house is still standing, and we.
That's right. It is.
Met
I
a
got
lady
photos.
from the Historical Society there, and we would have loved to have gone in, but there was a lady living there who wasn't in the mood to have visitors.
Someone in my family and I can't remember who, we took the journal down that published the article about the Yiddish ship at Ghost and donated it to them. This maybe be 10, 15, maybe 15 years ago, something like that, might be 20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, they knew, they had known about a Yiddish ghost.
And the other thing you didn't mention, the bandy-legged Jew story. I thought that was part of the story of.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Well, that's right. There's an article about that. The funny thing was, I attended the meeting when this article that George Bergman read to the meeting about the Yiddish ghost. I didn't know at the time I went that we're supposed to have a Jewish convict in the family, but no one ever mentioned it. It was kept quiet, and he didn't have much of a bad story once he arrived and lived in Australia. Not really, compared to perhaps having problems in England. The various family members had major problems in surviving because there wasn't much work around for Jewish people. Some people, for example, had to care for clothing, use clothing and so on. And apparently there's some mention that Henry Levy, Cindy's husband, was doing that sort of work, had looking after clothing, selling clothing.
The other comment I might make is up at Grenfell, which we visited a year or two ago. There's two Jewish graves in the cemetery there. One is our great uncle, which is Michael's brother.
Yep.
But Michael, as you say, I think he was an alderman in the Grenfell Council.
Yes, that's
and
right.
Their Historical Society's got a bit of material about the family in there. And they've got copies. They've got copies of your correspondence that you sent.
I know.
And that's how I got in touch. That's how I got in touch with Terry, because I went to the Historical Society and found the letter with my mother, with Gloria, and my aunt Edna, who Solomon Kirsch's daughters.
Yes.
And we were very excited to find that.
That was 1970 when my mother and I think my sister all went there.
Yeah.
We went by plane, I think.
Got correspondence from David as well. So anyway, I'll let other people chip in now.
Did that stimulate a little bit of interest on the Levy side?
Yes.
Thank you.
Could I just ask all the cousins to put up their hand, please? Because I recognise about 3.
I don't get any on my
Isn't it?
computer. I don't get any.
Oh, David, I don't know David. Sandra, are you an ACT? Is that right?
No, on the Central Coast.
Ah, oh,
Somebody got two
say
hands
how
up
you're
there.
related.
Sorry?
Say how you're related, Sandra.
Oh, John Levy is my two times great grandfather.
Oh, okay.
Michael's brother.
right. Wow.
Sandra, do you know Michael Fine, who lives in Woi Woi?
Oh, no, I don't.
He'd be one of, I don't think we know you at all, but yeah, we're Levy descendants from
Michael?
Well, yes, from Michael, and yeah, our great grandmother was Clara, who had a sister called Zipporah. As Terry said, the names keep cropping up. So there was a sister, great auntie Simi. There was also a Nathan.
Yeah, they recycle the names, don't they?
They do. Well, my brother, one of my brothers, his middle name is Lewis, spelt Lewis, and that's unusual. Usually Lewis is Louis, and I've never really
The family spelt it with
that
the
it's
EW.
a family name. Yeah.
My grandfather, my dad's father, was Lewis Levy, spelled Lewis, Louis Raphael Levy. Yeah.
Oh, well, also one of my grandmother's siblings was a Raphael too. He passed away young from diabetes. I think was only 21 or 22 when he died, because it was before insulin. And one of my younger brother Pietro, he has diabetes. Just must be a thing in the family.
Jackie,
You had a question?
Michael lives in Woi Woi, and he's really involved in the Woi Woi Folk Club, and they have performances and music and stuff if you're interested in all
Oh,
of that.
okay.
Yeah,
That's
just
probably about half an hour from me. Yeah.
So look them up online, the Woi Woi Folk Club. I think it's called the Trocadero or something.
I'm writing that down.
Or something, but yeah.
So you know how big music was in the family. It was a very big,
huge.
That's all about that. Jackie, can I just explain that I came across Sandra through Lionel Harold Levy, who was one of the lost diggers of Fromell, and Sandra is actually a great nephew of Lionel Harold Levy, and that's how I got to meet Sandra.
That's interesting. I've heard of Lionel as a name, but my mum, she just sort of kept in touch with everybody, knew everybody. So, yeah, that was her generation. So
Penny, sorry, what's your connection?
Solomon Kirsch, the youngest son of Michael.
I'm looking at the family tree.
Right, so the youngest son. And there were four children, Keith, the twins, Edna and Vina, and my mother, Gloria. And I remember when I came to Sydney a while back, I met your mother, Moya, for the first time.
Oh, wow.
A number of years ago. So, and they were in Sydney. They didn't have any, the only one who had children was my mother.
Oh, right.
So the baby of the family.
Wow. Okay.
And I was at the reunion.
Was Keith in Sydney?
Keith in Sydney. It was my uncle, late uncle.
He was a solicitor.
That's correct.
And a member of the board of the Great Synagogue.
And he was also a naval lieutenant during the Second World War in the reserves.
Elizabeth and Bernard put on that wonderful reunion all those years ago.
That's right.
I was thinking maybe we could have a reunion on Zoom, like pick a date and a time, and we could all, whoever's got the.
That's right. We should, Gail. That'd be great. Have a big Zoom
Why not?
Session.
Yes. So I don't know. Whoever's got the connection thing, and if they just give us, the numbers or whatever, and we could make a time and whatever, that would be good fun.
Try and get everyone together.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I have a request from Danny Husky, who's going to write the family story for the kosher koala.
Terry.
Can I just make a comment, please?
Certainly, David.
I'm Terry's brother, and it's great to see everybody going across the top. Sonny, Gail, my sister Marilyn, Jeanette, my cousin, and Elizabeth and Bernard, who I haven't seen since you've moved. It's good to see you, particularly Bernard. I haven't seen you for ages. Maybe when the shul reopens, we'll catch up again, or maybe we'll catch up independently. And Peter, and presumably Graham's around somewhere.
No, I haven't seen Graham, sorry. No.
Eliza and my niece Beck. Listen, it's great seeing you all. I'm going to actually sign off and say,
Hello, David. I'm your cousin, Margaret, Esther.
Where are you?
We have the same grandparents.
Oh,
yes, David.
Oh, you're down
I
there.
have a story about your uncle Philip, my dad, and he came up to visit Dennis and I when we had married and moved to the jungles of Indonesia. He and my mother came up there, and he was treated so well by the Indonesian soldiers. He had a troop that followed him everywhere and saluted him. And we couldn't work that out why, until Dennis noticed the cap on his head said the governor's pleasure, and it was in gold and green, and you had given it to him from the pub. And they all thought that he was an Australian general. And he loved it.
Great story.
Yes. So, yeah, Dad had a lot of stories. He was a very funny man. He used to be called Whistling Rufus when he was in Papua New Guinea during the war, because he was always happy and always whistling. But they also knew that he played the piano, and he used to entertain a lot when he wasn't actually out there all the time. And at one stage, he was brought to move a piano from one end of an oval to another because he volunteered as a pianist. He was the piano was the reason my mother married him, because his music attracted her, and that gift came from the Levy side. And at her engagement party, everybody performed. Everybody could either play an instrument or sing. And she was asked to do something, and she said, well, I can't play an instrument or sing. And they said, well, what can you do? And she said, well, I'm a very good listener. And it turns out my mother had Jewish blood, because I had my DNA done, and it came back the results from Israel. I'm 59%. And I always thought there was on the priestly side somebody Jewish, because if you can see this is the priestly plate from Yorkshire, England, where my mother's family came from.
Oh, wow.
Right. And with the Mogan Davids, the 12 Mogan Davids, and the olive leaf, and there's an L superseded. It's over the top of the P. Can you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
And I always suspected there was some Jewishness on my mother's side. So I'm still investigating. And I've got a picture here which shows our grandparents, Rachel and Lou Joel Levy, which you all have probably anyway.
Yes, I think a lot of us do.
Yeah. Yep. And her mother, Esther, was my middle name. I was named after. And this is my mother's my mother's mother family, the Priestleys, that originated somehow. Yorkshire came up. Someone else said Yorkshire. I don't know what happened with that. But anyway, all good because we're into my heritage, and Dennis and I spent hours and hours. You get hooked, don't you? You get really addicted to it. You forget to eat sometimes. But it's so good to see you, David and Marilyn.
I have lots and lots of wonderful memories of your dad and your mum, and particularly in Magnetic Island, and where we stayed with your parents.
Yes.
And it was really, really good, although I didn't realise at the time that Dad his mind was deteriorating somewhat. But to be able to come and hear him sit down at the piano so beautifully, then sing Shema and some of the blessings and Adon Olam from the time when he was a kid at the Great Synagogue. It was wonderful, and we always, as kids in Panania, enjoyed when the Levies came with their great big custom line Ford, pulling a caravan that was about 10 times longer than the car.
21 feet.
Yeah. So and how your dad managed to navigate backwards with it. No wonder he had the tow bar put on the front of the car as well. Anyway, Margaret, it's lovely seeing you, lovely talking to you, and lovely seeing all the cousins and the cousins who I haven't seen for a long time. It's nice to see Sonny up and about, and even Michael sometimes shadowing in the background there. It's nice to see him clothed instead of at the pool at the Walper, and Sarah Vorsheimer.
Oh, well.
It's been a long time. No, not so long since we ran into each other.
Yeah.
Jeanette,
Nice to see
Jeanette,
you,
lovely
Dad.
seeing you.
Not in hospital.
And not in right. Well, thank God I'm now walking again. So I'm looking ready to rock and roll as soon as everybody else gets their vaccinations.
Right. Now, Vicky, you had a question earlier. Is that you still like to ask that question? You need to unmute. Hang on, Vicky's going to talk. Yeah.
No, I don't. I was just going to ask a question to Terry. Terry, I was just wondering, you were talking about Berrimer and Berry. Were any of those Levies related to the Solomons who lived in that area? Do you know if there was a Rebecca Solomons?
There was some connection, but they weren't not close.
Oh,
We
right,
had some Levies down there and Solomons. You had a couple of families down there of Solomons, including Morris Solomon, who married, I think it was a daughter of Joseph Levy or something like that.
Was it Rachel or Rebecca? Because
Rebecca was a daughter of Joseph Levy, the convict.
Yeah. Right, the convict, that's right.
Close on 97 when she died in 1931.
I've actually got a ring, a relative of hers, who's a relative of mine, but not, gave me one of her rings, and her family were, I believe, the, you know, the book, My Aunts from the Cross. Have you heard of Byron Egan?
Yes.
You would know that book.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's her family. And a cousin of my father's, his second cousin, his mother's family were related to Rebecca Levy and the people who were up the cross. My aunt's up the cross. So it's sort of unusual that, I mean, it's not unusual, but but that the Jews were in Berry and Berrimer or wherever it is. So
not essentially. Our Levies mainly were the Berrimer ones. The other ones
Right.
Not,
What
but
about
they
Charlotte?
they were in the areas generally, but not close.
What can I just ask? What about Charlotte Levy? Is there a relation called Charlotte Levy? I'm sure.
Yeah. Charlotte was Michael Levy's. Oh, Charlotte was the married name. Levy was the married name.
No.
Kirsch was the maiden name.
Right. No, because I've got a Charlotte Levy who married Enoch Cohen.
Yeah.
That's different. Okay, thanks. That's interesting.
They're related to an extent through not Penny. The other one, where's her?
John.
Why are you bloody asking me then?
Yeah. Enoch was certain relative of connected with John Levy.
Enoch was a Cohen.
That's right, Enoch Cohen.
Yes, there was a relationship.
Yeah, John Levy.
Through their son.
Because Enoch Cohen's my great grandfather. Yeah. I'd just like to add very quickly, if it's okay, I just wanted to thank Jeanette Soulos, because although I've come back to the society, I went many years ago, probably in the 90s. Jeanette, at a workshop, which was actually at National Council, she directed me to, I know a lot about my family in New Zealand, the Myers family and the Goldsmith family, and in Australia, but I always, it's Jeanette who actually directed me to the Sephardi side of the family, and it's sort of led me on a whole different direction. So, and she introduced me to Barnett, who I'm actually related to, and who gave me a family tree going right back to Braganza in Portugal, and also Ponte de Lima. And when I was at the last workshop, I wasn't much help to anybody, but Jackie took me down to have a look at those records from the Portuguese synagogue and the Great Synagogue, and it was a great thrill. I photographed it, but I'd like to look more to see the wedding records, that recorded of Isaac Diaz and his marriage to, or I think it was Isaac Diaz who married Abigail Gomez de Costa. So it's a whole new area that, thanks to the
Genealogical Society.
The Genealogy Society has been very interesting for me, and sort of directed me to a whole new area. It also means that I can have rice on Pesach because of my now Sephardi.
David has a question, and then I'd like to come with some closing comments, if I may. David Laufer, go for it.
Terry mentioned the Jewish cemeteries at Grenfell, and I think also Forbes. Do you know the current status of those cemeteries? Do they still exist? Are they in good condition, poor condition? And you may know, Gary Lucas recently got heritage status for the Jewish cemetery in Goulburn. Is there any merit in looking to do the same at those cemeteries?
Could I butt in, because I wanted to ask something about that as well? It sounded like what you were reading from the letter was first-hand knowledge of that synagogue in Forbes, which would be really rare. Was it first-hand knowledge?
Oh, you're talking to me. No, what happened, it was supposed happened, but from memory, when they were researching, they didn't find it.
No, the letter that you read.
Oh, that letter?
The letter that you read, the person that wrote that letter, did they have first-hand knowledge of that synagogue in Forbes?
No, to be honest, where I read from was a newspaper report.
Oh, okay.
It was a newspaper report when they interviewed Bernard Levy in whatever year it was, when he was 74. And I thought, to be honest, they tried to track it down, And there wasn't, the cemetery wasn't, sorry, there weren't enough Jews to satisfy a cemetery on the one hand, and secondly, for a synagogue to be erected.
Where I've read of it, it was supposedly a small timber building that possibly got washed away in one of the floods of Forbes.
Could be.
But I don't believe there's any synagogue in building in Grenfell either.
No.
No.
So do those cemeteries still exist?
Yes, the cemetery in Grenfell still exists, and I think 4 or 5 years ago, Reverend Hilton from the Great Synagogue buried a Jewish person down there in the Grenfell cemetery, and Jeanette's sister Robin will have a photograph of that, and I'm not sure who else was there. I mean, it's in reasonable condition. It's well, obviously, it's still consecrated because Reverend Hilton there did the matzeva for whoever the person was that died down there.
Can I just ask a question about
I'll just follow that because
I can see you, Sarah, just a minute.
The cemetery in Forbes does have a Jewish section, an iron railing fence, mainly around one of the families, I've forgotten the full name, that was one of the big hotel owners in town, and the hotel is still there as well. So that's Forbes Jewish burials.
Okay, Sarah?
Yeah. The cemetery in Grenfell, when I was there probably about 10 years ago, in the old part, there was only one grave left standing.
That was John Levy.
Yeah, and it was John Levy. Yeah, it was really eerie. The Historical Society, he sent a photo to me, and then we went up. He said when he walked up, he said there was only one headstone still standing, and he said I was sure it wasn't going to be him, but when he walked around the other side, it was quite clear the engraving on the headstone, and it was John Levy's. It was the only one that was left there.
Yeah. Okay. Can I talk now?
Yes.
Yes. What I want to say is some years ago, I think it was 2003 from memory, I won a place in a literary award in Grenfell at the Henry Lawson Grenfell, whatever I called it. And from that, I got a farm stay, and I learned a bit about Jews in the area. I'd already found a bit too. And I believe, yes, there was a section of a Jewish cemetery. There was in Forbes, I do understand there was a synagogue that probably did get washed away, and that there's a Jewish cemetery. I think it's actually part of the main cemetery. That's what I understood when I was staying there, and all the local town was kind of faking me and other people who won awards.
Great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Sarah. To everybody that's attended this afternoon, it's been an amazing afternoon. To stay together for as long as we have and to hear all the stories have been really fabulous. I do hope somebody of the family will gather together and write us a story that we can add to Kosher Koala as we celebrate our 30th anniversary. Just out of interest, the speakers that we had today totaled a time of 76 years of being members of the society. So what we're telling you is that there's a lot of experience in this group of people. So those of you who are not members, we invite you to join us. I also have a message from Danny Haskey, who wasn't present at the beginning of this meeting because she went to the Jewish Museum presentation of a mural, and she said it was fabulous. So if we get the chance to see that, that might be something else. And later in the week, on Wednesday, is it, Danny? There is going to be another presentation from the Sydney Jewish Museum. So keep an eye out for that. That should also
next
be
Sunday. Next Sunday.
Next Sunday. I thought it was midweek. Okay.
No, it's next Sunday, and you can register online, and it's free, and it's about art and telling family history stories using art. It's magnificent.
Right.
Unfortunately, the exhibition, no one is going to get to see the exhibition unless they live locked down. The mural that Wendy has painted will be painted over.
Oh,
yeah, which is why as soon as we get the link, for today's talk, which is an exploration of the mural, we will send an email out to the membership. So it was beautiful, and the idea that no one's going to get to see it in real life is quite devastating.
And they take lots of photos or videos, obviously.
They're documenting it in a million different ways.
Right.
I suggested also doing some sort of virtual reality recording so that we can put goggles on and pretend like we're standing in the room. And Google Culture also does a thing where they take very, very high resolution photos of artworks. You can actually get closer to it than if you put your nose up against it.
Wow.
You can zoom right in, and the artwork's incredibly complex. It's also massive. Does everyone know the upstairs temporary exhibition room at the Sydney Jewish Museum, where the Sephardi exhibition was? If you imagine all the walls around that painted with one story of her family, her trip to Ukraine. It's quite exquisite, and there's so much detail in it that I think the only way to do it justice is if people can kind of explore it. Because if you're in the room, you'd go up and you'd look really closely at things. So I'm actually going to give them a call tomorrow and have a chat about a couple of other related things, which I will be telling everyone about in due course. But we'll send everyone the link as soon as the museum posts it, because it's really well worth watching. It's beautiful, and next week's talk will be quite interesting as well. So it's Wendy, her husband, and somebody else, and it's about art and family stories. So it's right up our Straza, as my sister-in-law would say. So,
any other comments? Anybody else like to say some farewells?
Just to say,
I just wanted to say thanks to Terry.
Yes,
absolutely.
On my knees, you have to do that.
No, because I didn't know a lot of the things, because I'm probably not really gotten too much involved in it. Didn't know we came from convicts, which I'm still coming to grips with.
Not directly convicts, but anyway.
Pretty close.
Yeah, wow, so interesting. So thanks for that, Terry. I know it's a lot of your work.
And I thank Terry as well. It's fantastic. But I've just got a general question that's been in my mind for a long time. Before Henry was in London, where do you think the family came from? And I mean, could they be Sephardic? I don't think we know, do we? And do you think we'll ever find out?
It might happen. It might, because a bit more research has to be done over there. The problem is, as I said, how many levies have we got in England? A stack of them, a whole stack.
And I think at that time, in those years, they weren't so much Polish, come from Poland or Russia. They were more from Germany, France, Austria, maybe.
We're talking about the 1700s.
Yes.
Arrival
yes.
in England.
Yes, yes. Well, most of the Jews then came from Holland or Germany.
That's right.
Actually, the Abrams family were Sephardim. I found that researching.
Yeah.
So there we are.
If you have a look in the newest Kosher Koala, there's a brand new Sephardi Genealogy Society has just been established. There's a couple of links there. It's worth, and there's always Facebook groups and what have you, because the Bevis Marks records, unfortunately, they're not well indexed online. There are some cheeky ways of getting access to them online. And once we're allowed to venture out again, of course, we've got the index books at our library, but they're really difficult to find stuff in. But Bevis Marks goes back.
It's in London. Not everyone knows London.
Oh, Bevis Marks is the oldest Sephardi synagogue in London. So
Well, we know they were married at the Great Synagogue in London, which perhaps suggests Ashkenazi, but I'm just curious.
That's that's an Ashkenazi synagogue.
Curious to know where they came from, because of course the Jews were kicked out. I don't remember when that was.
1490s. 1490s.
If they came whether from Spain or Portugal, there was a bit of a gap between them.
Yeah, Portugal was a little bit later, but
later because they were
kicked out of Spain.
Kicked out of Spain, they went to Portugal, and down the track, a lot of them went to Holland and left Holland.
Yeah, but then a lot went to Istanbul as well. So
yeah,
my four times great grandmother, her maiden name was Levy, and she came to Vienna from Constantinople.
Right.
Sometime in the late 18th century. Yeah, her husband was president of the Sephardi community in Vienna.
Yeah.
So that definitely suggests Spain to Constantinople to Vienna. So
I have a question for my cousin Terry. As you know, my dear husband was born in Bernstein, and he's been researching. We want to know if we're related because we come from the same area and Ashkenazi Jews came from. We Polish, Russian, and you name it.
It might be related, but might not be.
Do your DNA.
Yeah, we've done the DNA, and I got Jeanette answered that, and we got to know each other, and she's a piano teacher. I'm still teaching piano. It's amazing, this connection. It's all because
musical connection.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeanette, for
really
your help.
But I didn't mention
I mean,
that.
of course we're all related because, 12 tribes.
Same, and
all related somewhere back there.
That's right, but
Yeah. I just wanted to say, Terry, just getting back to the Duneba thing, the only definite or possible connection we really have is that, wasn't it your grandfather who said he knew that Henry Levy was our relative? Was that right? So somehow or other, he was the only person who ever said that. But he must have known.
Sorry, which one, Henry Levy?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the one, the Henry Levy who died on the Dunbar.
Oh, Dunbar. No, he didn't marry. He was only young.
No, but it was wasn't it your grandfather who said, we know that he was our family, he was our family member that went down in the Dunbar.
Well,
otherwise we've never heard.
Bernard was on, Bernard.
Yep.
His father kept asking us, can we find it? Bernard, and that's where you get some Henrys in the family.
All right. Okay.
Coming down in the generations. But I have to prove it to my satisfaction.
Yeah.
That he was related, that he went down.
Yeah.
But I have to, my problem is a lot of my records are in boxes. All right.
Right.
Yeah, we'll find it eventually. Okay. How many people were linked up?
One stage.
Sorry?
How many?
29 in total.
Fantastic.
All right. That's a good turnout. That's great.
Yeah,
That's a fabulous turnout.
yeah.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane, and thank you so much for sharing your story.